Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today we have Aaron Whitmore with Little Mulligan and Whitmore, and Aaron is an educational consultant. And Aaron, would you please introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah. Hey, Seb, thanks so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, I'm an educational consultant with Little Mulligan and Whitmore. A little bit of my background. I actually grew up in New England going to public schools. Both my parents were public school educators, and I knew I wanted to be in education at some point down the road. But I also knew that public schools didn't necessarily do me quite as well as I maybe could have done had I been at a great school that was a great match for me. And so I remember going off to college and looking around and seeing kids who knew how to study. They knew how to go talk to their teachers. They knew what it meant to be a student. And I was wowed. And I was like, where did these kids come from? And so I started doing a little bit of research, and that's when I learned about independent schools. And I said, wow, that is something that I want to be a part of. That is something that is pretty special, and I think could be a really great match for a lot of kids. So it took me a little while to find my way to the educational space. But I started working at boarding schools back in Connecticut. I worked at Kent School in Connecticut, where I lived in a dorm with 65 high school boys. I was an admission officer, so I got a chance to travel the world, visiting schools and learning about different types of education around the world. And I also had a chance to coach sports. I coached football and basketball, and um, really loved the boarding school experience. So from there, I moved to Milton Academy, where I did a lot of the same work. I even coached kayaking and taught a human sexuality and relationships class there. So pretty wild experiences. And then moved out to um, work at Crystal Springs Upland School, where I ran the admission office in Hillsborough for the 13 years. Had a great experience. I loved Crystal. And a few years ago, I partnered with Betsy Little and Paula Mulligan, who have been educational consultants for the last 20 plus years, and joined forces with them to bring the most up-to-date admission experience and information, and partner that with Betsy and Paula's experience as educational consultants. So I absolutely love this work. And yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit about it with you today.
Well, I get the feeling that you actually do love this work. That really came through right there loud and clear. So, before you and I met, honestly, I had no idea what an educational consultant is or does. And I'm guessing I'm not the only person who does not know that. So, maybe you could just help everyone understand what exactly is an educational consultant.
Yeah, great question. And this is something I could never have imagined myself doing this role back in the day, but imagine me as a coach. So I work as a coach to help kids and families figure out their next school. Um, when you think about education, there's a lot of different information that is helpful to know. And when I was growing up, there was one school, and you went to that school, and whether you liked it or not, that was where everybody went. And now there are many different types of schools. There's a lot of choice, specifically out in this Bay Area. There are some amazing different types of schools. And finding the right one that's a great match for your child and your family can make all the difference in the success for your child in their education. So, what I like to do is really to help families think about what are their values, what is important to them, and why, and how do you communicate this as you go through the application process with schools. So, my hope is to help to make the application process much smoother, to take stress off of families as they're going through this very complicated, complex process, and often to be the voice of reason for kids and families as kind of an outsider perspective.
So I imagine that you probably work with people who are kind of like new to the area, I would assume, right? And they really have no idea about the schools in the Bay Area. And so I guess, like, are those the kind of people who work with you, or like who mostly chooses to work with an educational consultant?
Yeah, so that is absolutely one of the groups of people that often work with educational consultants are folks that are moving into town, right? Or moving to a new place where they really don't know much about the schools, the public schools or the private schools, or the variety of options. So they will come to me as an educational consultant or other educational consultants and say, hey, listen, I really don't know anything about the school system. Can you be the expert for us? And that's what I am, is I am able to be the expert. Just like you, for example, Seb, you are the expert in real estate, right? And families go to you and say, hey, you're the expert. Can you lead us through this process? Can you tell us what we should be thinking about, what questions we should be asking, where we should be looking, what houses might be a good fit based upon our parameters? And that's exactly what I want to do with these families that are moving into town. I also provide a resource for families that are, just trying to think about, even in their own area, what might be a good match. As I said, there are a lot of different options, and um, you know, most people are not experts in this field. And I've spent 21 years um, visiting schools, studying schools, looking at pedagogy, learning about all the different options to be able to properly share with families really kind of what the culture is. Because when you look at the websites, a lot of websites look very similar, and it's hard to differentiate or tell the difference between different schools without knowing the culture, and that often is what's going to be at the heart of some of this decision making for families as they look at different schools.
So people who are moving to the Bay Area, do they start working with you before they start the move, or like would you want to buy in Saratoga or like Menlo Park? Is that like a factor? Like they would talk to you before they decide typically, or do they just move here and then look you up? What do you recommend?
Yeah. So what typically happens is families will find out that they're going to be moving to the area, and then they will reach out to us first and say, you know what, our kids' education is the most important piece of this transition for our family. And so we want to have our kids' education lined up before we figure out where we're going to live. And then we will figure out our housing situation based upon the school and proximity to the school. So um, quite honestly, that is the way it often works. Is they'll come to me, we'll go through the whole application process. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but typically admission decisions are released in March. The application deadline is in January, and decisions are released in March. So around that March timeframe is when a lot of families will know where their child is going to be going to school, and then we'll say, great, we're going to start, spend the next couple of months figuring out our housing situation. We'll be here for the summer and then to start the school year in August.
Well, that's pretty interesting because that coincides with like the spring real estate market, right? So there you
Interesting how that
go, huh?
works.
So all the schools tend to do this. Is that what you're saying? They basically take applications in January and decide by March.
Yeah, yeah. So I can talk a little bit about the timeline here of applying to private schools.
Well,
Um,
why don't you just walk me through the whole process of like the admission? Like how does that work?
Yeah. So, we'll start right now where this is actually a great time for families to start to look at and think about schools, um, not for this coming August, but for the following August. I know it sounds crazy, but this gives you a little bit of runway to start to visit some school websites, talk to friends and families and coworkers in the area that have kids and or that have alumni at these private schools that you're curious about. Um, Start to talk about the process as a family and the investment and the time commitment that it's going to take to go through and apply to schools. Um, and then I would even recommend trying to visit schools in the spring, whether that's formally through some schools will host looking early tours in the spring where they will invite prospective families to campus, do a full walkthrough, maybe even give a couple of speeches and share some information about the school, but also doing some informal visits to the school where it's kind of interesting. Schools have a lot of different activities that are posted on their website. And generally, if the activity is posted on the website, it's open to the public. So things like sporting events. If your child is into tennis, for example, you might go check out a tennis match this spring and see the school in action. Schools also often have a spring theatrical performance, like a spring musical. And if your child is into theater or into the arts, this would be a really great way to get on campus, to see the school in action, to talk to some of the kids and families, to get their perspective about what it's like being a student and a parent at that school. So I would say that is a really good use of your time in the spring, is to start this process, to start to think about, you know, what schools might be a good match. Summertime, I think, is really important for kids to be kids and kids to relax, enjoy themselves. But if you want to try to use the summer um, to try to be efficient as part of this process, you might have your child start to review some school websites, right? And maybe jot down like a list of pros and cons for the schools based upon their website, and then based upon whether that anything popped up during the visits that you did in the spring. Okay.
So
I recommend,
you suggest before they even apply to a school that they basically start stalking the school, essentially.
yeah, yeah. You want to gather as much information as possible about the schools before you apply. Um,
And so,
because,
so
like I said, there are a lot of schools.
at what point do you get involved, right? So like, do you get involved like a year before they actually apply, or 2 years? I mean, like this runway sounds kind of long here. So at what point do you come in?
Yeah. So on the peninsula, most schools will run pre-K or kindergarten through fifth grade, and then sixth through eighth or sixth through 12th grade. Okay. So the main entry points for starting at a lot of these independent or private schools is pre-K or kindergarten. And then sixth would be the next main entry point, and then ninth would be the next main entry point. So right now, I'm actually starting to work with families for the 26-27 school year. Okay. In the winter, as I said, to kind of get going early um, with these families, to put together a plan, a process to start the spring, the summer, to try to stretch things out a little bit. So that way, when the fall hits, it's not too stressful. With that said, I will start working with families, as late as like November before a January deadline, and can really, turn things around quickly. And I think I can be really helpful for both sets of families, families that are really looking ahead and want to be prepared, but also for families that are, coming in late to the process and really need to be, super tuned in with their time frame and really efficient with their time. Those are two different groups that I think I can be really, really helpful with. So I guess just going back really quickly. So with the main entry points, typically if a kid was applying to sixth grade, for example, starting in the winter of fourth grade would be a great time to start to think about this process, right? Or if your child is applying to ninth grade, starting to think about the process in the winter of seventh grade would be a great time.
So roughly maybe like 18 months even before you actually apply to a school, they would start working with you, and you would talk to them and find out what their priorities are for their kids' education. And then you would discuss, I guess, the different options they have in the Bay Area. And would people apply to multiple schools because these schools are hard to get into, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So these schools are very, very competitive to get into. You know, for example, one of the schools that I worked at, we had, for sixth grade alone, we had about 400 applications looking to bring in about 72 new students. Right. I know another school up in San Francisco where they see well over 1,000 applications looking to bring in 150 new students for ninth grade. So it is very competitive. And and so my recommendation typically when I work with families is you want to shoot to apply to roughly 5 to 7 schools. Okay. Now, that number will be based upon how comfortable you feel with whatever your potential backup option might be, right? So public school is a given for all kids. Um, and so you need to think about, you know, how does this school, X, Y, or Z school feel compared to the potential of attending, this other school? And that's what's going to determine how many schools you end up applying to. For example, we live in San Francisco, and there are some really great public schools in San Francisco. There are also some not so great public schools. And so what we went through as a family is we said, okay, um, we really value education because this is incredibly important for our family. So we are going to apply to a number of private schools because we really want to try to guarantee a spot at a private school for us. And so, some families might say, all right, well, to guarantee that, you need to apply to 7, 8, 9 schools, right? Other families might say, you know what, we live in a great town with amazing public schools. We're going to apply to 1 or 2 schools. We're going to shoot for the moon and see what happens. And if we get in, great. If not, we know we have this amazing public school for our child to go to, and we're going to be totally happy going there. So it really varies based upon the family and based upon, what you're looking for in your child's education. But I would say typically families are going to apply in that, you know, we say shoot for 5 to 7, but maybe it ends up being like 4 to 6 range.
So I would imagine that each one of these schools has like a special admissions process, right? Because they're private, they're not regulated really like public schools are. So they could pretty much pick and choose who their students are going to be. What kind of criteria do they use to choose? I mean, I obviously everyone is different, and I guess that's where you come into play because you would know, okay, this school they are looking for this kind of kid or this kind of background or this kind of skill set or test scores or whatever. What are the typical things that these schools look at, and how do you help shepherd the parents and the families through that admissions process?
Yeah, great question. So every school has a mission statement, right? And the mission statement is truly what guides the school, and it guides the decision making for everything that school does, from how they teach to who they hire to um, who they admit as part of their admission process. So um, what's really important is for families to look at the mission statement and to see how they resonate as a family with that mission statement. Um, you know, a lot of schools, and there's a lot of different types of schools. There are schools for kids with, learning differences. There's schools who for kids who absolutely, have love school and have really strong academics. There's schools for kids that really care deeply about the arts. There's boarding schools. There are charter schools. So, it really comes down to looking at the mission and starting to get a feel for the culture of the school to figure out what might be a good match. And this is why it's kind of crazy, but in an ideal world, the work that I do wouldn't exist, right? But this process of looking at schools, you know, we are so fortunate that there are many different types of schools that are great fits for different types of kids. And so, help being able to help families kind of navigate and think about what might be a good match can be very valuable for families. Um, so I guess I don't know if that answers your question, but it really does come down to the mission of the school is really what they're looking for.
So, but do you like, I mean, do you like fill out the application for them or like, are there essays that people write and that you tell them what to say?
Yep. Great question. I do not write the applications. A lot of times I act as a sounding board, right? Where, we'll take a look at some of the questions, and, I'll sit with the family and just say, tell me what you think. How do you feel? Um, what are your values, and how do your values tie with this question? And and just let them talk and let them kind of think through. And and then what I can do is I can give them feedback, and I can say, as somebody that knows this school deeply, I can say, you know what? I think what you talked about absolutely matches incredibly well with the school's mission. Go for it. Go do some writing. Um, write out your response and let me know what you think. Um, or I can say, you know what? I know this school well, and what you just talked about does not match at all with their mission, right? And so you're probably going to want to rethink how you talk about this because, if you're saying, um, you know, we don't care at all about sports, yet you're applying to a school that really where sports is a big part of their culture, that's probably not going to resonate with them as they go through the application process and look at all the different candidates. So, I really act as a sounding board and as an insider to be able to give information about, hey, here's something that these schools are really excited about and really looking for um, in the candidates that they're looking at. And this is what I think might be a good match. Um, and then being able to answer questions as families go through the process. But the
So
families do all the writing, they do all the work. I'm really acting as the sounding board and a
so
coach.
you do go over the applications with them. You discuss what's on the thing, and you basically, yeah, you're a sounding board, and you give them maybe some tips on, how they might want to, answer certain questions on the application. So, do people get like waitlisted for these schools? And like, if you do get waitlisted, do they give you like a position in the queue, or can you talk about that at all?
Yeah. So a lot of schools will use the term wait pool instead of wait list. And the reason that they use the term wait pool is because a list kind of makes implies that there's a ranking, and as these schools go through the process, they don't necessarily rank the kids that are in the wait pool because what they'll do is if when they send out all their offers, um, they will hear back from some families who will say, "Yeah, I'm super excited to come to your school." Great. They'll also hear from some families that say, "You know what? We love your school, but we're going to go to a school down the road for whatever reason." Um, and at that point, the first school would say, "Okay, well, we have a spot available. Um, let's take a look at our wait pool candidates." And then at that point, what they would do is they would look at kind of who has already said yes to them and what does the makeup of the class look like. And then they'll say, do we have any holes? Do we have any gaps, any areas that we need to fill with this next spot that we're going to bring in? Do we need a girls' soccer goalie? Okay, then we'll look at the pool of girls. And even if you're a great male candidate, if you're not that specific piece that they're looking for the puzzle, then you might not get the call from the wait pool. So that's why they use the term wait pool instead of wait list. And if you are in the wait pool, that means that you're a viable candidate. That means that the schools see you as somebody that they could see at their school. They just don't have enough space for all the great candidates that they have coming through, unfortunately.
So, this is kind of hard to answer, but like, what are your odds of getting in if you're in the wait pool? And is it like just 1 in 100, and you should basically keep looking at that point if you're in the wait pool, or?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So I would say it varies from school to school and year to year. So some schools will put a lot of kids in the wait pool and say, we think there are a lot of really great, viable kids. Other schools will be very targeted and say, we're only going to put 3 or 4 kids in the wait pool because we know if we have spots, these are the 3 or 4 kids that we're going to go to, right? Um, some schools will, one year they will have openings from their wait pool, but then the next year they might not. It really comes down to what the yield is on the number of acceptance offers that they send out there. And the way schools do it is they put out more acceptance offers than they actually have spaces available, knowing that there are a certain percentage and a certain number of kids that will not accept their offer.
Right. So if you're on the wait pool within like maybe 2 weeks, they might just call you up. Like your best chance from when you're in the wait pool to actually getting accepted is like a short window, like 2 weeks or something like that, when they find out who's actually accepted their invitation to come to the school. Is it 2 weeks or is
Yeah,
it
so
3 weeks or what is it?
Yeah, great question. So decisions go out mid-March. Um, Local day schools typically give about a week for families to make their decision.
Okay.
Um, they may have wait pool activity during that week. They may not, and they may fill up by the end of that week. But then what happens sometimes is it's almost like a domino effect where one kid decides or gets out of wait pool at one school, and then they leave the spot that they had at another school to go to the one school, and then it kind of sets off a domino effect. So typically, it takes about 3 weeks into usually early April for all the dust to settle. Um, and then once the dust settles, April, kind of mid to late April through mid-May tends to be pretty quiet on the admission front. And then sometimes June 1st is when a lot of schools have their big payment due for the next school year. And that's when families typically are on the hook for the full tuition for the next school year. So that's usually around June 1st. So sometimes that last week of May, there's a little bit of movement in the wait pool where families say, you know what, we're moving out of town, or, we just can't afford this tuition for this year, or academically, we just don't see it as a great fit for our family. And so that last week before they're on the hook for the full tuition, there's sometimes some movement. And then, occasionally over the summer, family, last minute has to move out of town, and that's sometimes when things open up as well. But, to your question, usually it's that first 3 weeks, right around when decisions come out of when most of the wait pool movement happens.
Well, that's very good to know. That's very valuable information. So, you know, uh, do people really actually need to hire like a consultant? Like, like I'm a realtor, right? You don't really need a realtor to buy or sell a house, maybe for best results you do, right? But is it the same thing with schools? I mean, is like, do you have like a lot of competition? Are there a lot of people in this space? Or just tell me more about the need for people in your position. I mean, could you do it alone, or what do you stand to lose out on if you do it alone?
Absolutely. Yeah. Lots of families go through the application process without an educational consultant, and you absolutely can do it. Um, it's a matter of what your family needs. Some families need a little extra TLC going through the process. Some families are looking for an expert to help walk them through the process. Some people need a project manager. Some people really need that in-depth cultural information about the schools. Some families have, a tricky child that they don't necessarily know where they're going to fit. So, could you go through the process without a consultant? Absolutely. Um, there are, you know, and with that said, is it hiring a consultant can be incredibly helpful to walk families through a very complicated, very complex, and very time-consuming process. Um, as far as whether there are a lot of consultants, there are more and more popping up over time, and I would say that you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence as you explore, because there's going to be a range of um, costs, but also a range of services that you're going to get from that, and a range of experiences that you're going to get from the different folks that are in this space.
But I would imagine, though, that because these schools are competitive to get into, that and there is, so much to know about them and understand, how to craft your application, that working with a consultant like yourself, you would probably have like a better chance of getting into the school. Is that not correct? Or
So families that work with us tend to do very well in the application process. I think it's because we're able to help direct them to the schools that are a great match for their families, so that they're not applying to schools that are um, just not a good match. I think that's a really big piece is making sure that it's a good fit, but also uh, being able to give feedback and information that other applicant families just don't have access to. Where I've spent hours at these schools and spending time with families and students, and going to see events at the school. And so we just know these schools way better than anybody else would know them. And so it's one of those pieces that, having access to expert information can really help.
All right, well, I'm sold. So let's just say that I wanted to start working with you. What does it look like to work with you? I mean, do we meet in person? Is it over Zoom? Do we meet once a week, once a month? I mean, what's it actually, what's the process? Because I'm going to be working with you for 18 months, sounds like, right? So we're going to have
Yeah.
a relationship. So what does that,
Yeah.
what does it look like in terms of actually working with you?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm starting to work with families now, signing on. And uh, typically I'll meet, if we start early, typically we'll meet a few times in the spring. Summer is usually pretty slow, and then we really dive in earnest in kind of mid-August.
But
Once
you meet in
mid-August
person?
hits,
Do you meet in person, like at your office, or you go to their homes, or how, when you say meet, what does that mean?
yeah. So most of the work that we do is virtual. So I use Google Meet for most of the meetings, which has allowed it to be more accessible for families. With that said, most families I end up meeting with at some point in person, um, whether it's at their home or grabbing a meal together, as part of the relationship building, so they can really truly understand who I am, and their child can understand who I am as a coach for both the kid and for the family. And then, once we dive in August, then we're meeting, based upon the needs of the family. So most of the time, it's every week or so, week or 2 weeks, it might be. Um, a lot of times we'll talk about an essay, and I'll say, okay, go write it, and then they'll write it, and then they'll send it back to me and say, hey, do you have any feedback? And I'll say, yeah, here's some feedback. Here are some things that you want to think about. Here are some things that you might want to tweak or twist. Um, Go back and do a little bit more writing. And so some of the work is just done virtually, and then we'll come back and we'll talk again. I think one of the pretty awesome pieces that we offer at Little Mulligan and Whitmore is for families that are looking at kindergarten. My partners, Betsy and Paula, actually started and were the ones that created the kindergarten readiness assessment for a lot of the San Francisco schools. And so we can run um, kindergarten applicants through a kindergarten readiness assessment and give feedback and say, hey, here are some things that you might want to work on. Here are some things where your child might be a little bit below where they should be, or here are some areas where your child is totally excelling. Great work, amazing. Um, but also, we can do some interview prep as well to help prepare both parents and students for the interviews that they'll need to do as part of this process. And the way I look at that is trying to help people build skills that are not necessarily teaching to the test, but are skills that they will be using for the rest of their life. How do you identify? How do you communicate who you are? Again, going back to what are your values? What is important to you? What are the parameters? What are these? And how do you share that, right? Talk a lot about body language. Um, so those are all parts that will be happening throughout the fall. So I guess to answer your question, it's every week or two that I meet with families.
Yeah, and this goes, and you will be meeting with them for like a year or a year and a half. Is that kind of like the average? Is like a year or a year and a half? Is that?
It basically is about 9 to 12 months. Um, and yeah, so we spend a lot of time together and we get to know each other incredibly well. And just this past week, I was going on vacation with my family, and we were in the airport, and I ran into one of my clients, and it was like, oh my gosh, great to see you. We're all going to the same place, great. And so we met up and had a chance to connect once we were at our destination, and just were able to spend some time. So for me, it really is about building these deep connections with people, and it's not a transactional relationship. These are folks that we are connected with for a long time.
All right. So, real quick before we wrap up here, do you have like some tips? Maybe I don't know, three, four, five tips that you can give, when applying to these private schools here in the Bay Area?
For sure. Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, cast your net wide. Um, there are a lot of schools, and I think the earlier you can start, the better you can get to know a wider range of schools. And oftentimes, what school a kid ends up going to is not a school that they initially had on their list, or maybe not a school they initially knew a whole lot about. But as part of the process, they casted their net wide. They went in with open minds to really take in and learn what each of these schools is all about, um, and and we're really thoughtful about the process. A lot of the independent schools in this area, as I talked about, are very competitive and quite honestly are reach schools for everyone that applies to them. So you want to be mindful of applying to schools, almost like college, like you apply to the reach schools, but also being mindful to apply to some schools that might be a little bit more likely for you to be admitted to. Okay, so cast the net wide and go in with an open mind. I would say another tip would be to be authentic. And, I know this sounds a little cheesy, but admission directors and schools really want to get to know you and your child for who you are. And they want to make sure that who they are bringing in genuinely and authentically fits with and matches with the culture and community of their school. Okay. Sure, you're going to, families are going to prepare, and schools recognize that you want to do well in this process. So you're going to want to prepare, but you don't want to over prepare. You don't want your kid to come in and be absolutely perfect in the interview because schools are going to look at that and say, this is just not authentic. This kid is not real, and this is not the kid or this is not the family that we're going to see on a day-to-day basis. So you really truly want to be authentic. Um, uh, as part of this process. Schools understand that these are children still, and they don't need to be perfect. Okay. Um, I would say tip number three is don't feel like as parents you need to do everything for your child in this process. Now, obviously, this is going to depend upon age, right? If you're applying to pre-K or kindergarten, yeah, you're going to be doing all the work. But if you're applying to middle school or high school, independent schools really want kids to take the bull by the horns. They really want kids to step up. Um, and part of this process is practicing some of these skills. It's practicing speaking with adults, it's practicing writing and time management, it's showing manners. Um, these schools are often referred to as prep schools because they truly are preparing kids for, you know, um, college and beyond. And, this application process is part of the preparation, right? To ensure that the kids can manage these skills in their next school, right? I would say number four is hit the deadlines. This is probably a given, but with such a competitive process, you got to make sure you hit every one of the deadlines. In fact, I would recommend getting your application pieces in early. One little tip, families that I work with, my goal is to try to get applications finished by Thanksgiving break. Okay, application deadline is January. We try to get everything done by Thanksgiving break so that families can actually take that Thanksgiving break to decompress, to spend time as a family together, to reconnect, and to take a little bit of pressure off that school year because it can be stressful for kids and families. I would also recommend that when signing up for tours and interviews, that you take earlier slots when possible. Every year, I worked at Crystal. I had families that would sign up for the last possible admission interview date because they thought their kid would be that much older, and then they would call me and say, Aaron, my kid is sick. Can we reschedule? And I would say, I'm sorry, we don't have any spaces left. Right. So my recommendation is to be early with these deadlines. You want to show these schools that you are committed and focused on your work. Okay. I would say tip number five is try to be memorable, but for the right reasons. Okay, and this goes back to that authentic piece. I've seen people at open houses with 500 people at the open house trying so hard to be known by the school, raising their hand at every question, and elbowing people out of the way to try to talk to who they think the right person is to talk to. Um, by sending hundreds of thank you notes. This stuff is all too much. Okay. Schools, again, they want to learn who you are through this process. They want to build a genuine relationship with you as an applicant family, with your child as an applicant, um, to really know who you are. And so it really is that authentic relationship building that you're looking for as you go through this process. And then I would say one bonus uh, recommendation or tip that I would have is have fun with the process. And I know this sounds crazy because it is, a lot. It's overwhelming, it's stressful, but have fun with it. Rarely in your lifetime are you going to have an opportunity to spend, anywhere from, 6 to 9 months to truly reflect on your family's values, what you care about, and why. And if you do this the right way, you and your family can really truly grow a lot from this process. I can't tell you the number of families that I've worked with as a consultant that have come to me after everything has been submitted and said, Aaron, I can't thank you enough. At this point, we've done everything that we can. And quite honestly, we don't care where we get into school right now. We've learned so much about our family, so much about our child, and my child has grown so much in this process. We're like, we're actually really thankful for the process. So try to really enjoy and make the most of it because you really can learn a lot about your child, and really build some great connections as a part of this difficult process. That's
So,
right.
so Aaron, how do people get a hold of you if they want to, discuss, private schools here in the Bay Area or working with you, or what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so I'd say starting with our website, which is www.littleandmolligan.com. So that's Little and Mulligan, Molligan.com. And my email address is Aaron, at littleandmolligan.com. Those would probably be the two best ways to learn about us and to connect with me. Um, and yeah, I would love to hear from some folks. People have questions, specifically about schools. That's my wheelhouse. I'm ready to go.
All right, very, very good. Okay, well, that is all the questions I had for you today. Aaron, I want to thank you so much for making yourself available, and I look forward to seeing you, sometime soon.
Sounds great, Seb. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, we'll catch you later.